Really happy to have Benji on because first of all, he's an old college. Secondly, he got a job at Deloitte. I don't know, for those of you who remember, I think it was the first workshop where we did that chart of the number of people who apply for all the employers. I'm pretty sure Deloitte was number one, like thousands of applications for what was presumably only not that many spots here in Adelaide. So
we're up to 40,000 plus this year in applications.
Ben's come up with this really handy structure: prepare, practice, and perform. We'll jump straight into it. So this is a Australian Association of Graduate Employers, top 110 employers in Australia fill out this survey. They're asked, of the stuff that what do you assess for in your graduate and internship recruitment, and then kind of rating it by how important it is. So from basically most important to least important. And when I talk to students in grad, you always assume that university grades and work experience are the most important, so everyone focuses on that. But actually, when you look at the data, of course, there's all this other stuff that employers are saying is more important, and students don't tend to think about much, so you tend to neglect it. And so that then leads into why do employers use interviews in the first place. It's because a lot of the absolute critical stuff like communication skills, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, you just can't, there's no other way to assess for that. Like you can't really judge someone's emotional intelligence from their CV or from online forms, or psychological testing, some would argue goes some way, but there's not currently any substitute for an interview. So interviews clearly very important.
Emotional intelligence being what exactly?
Yeah, good question. It's not actually defined in the interview, but it's you're familiar with IQ.
Yeah.
It's kind of the interpersonal, emotional skill set that goes alongside that. So, in the workplace, it would translate well to dealing with awkward, difficult, uncomfortable situations.
Confrontation.
Yeah. Clearly very important for team environments, which most workplaces are. And the truth is, there's no shortage of robot graduates. A lot of students graduate that can learn every bloody textbook out there, but they're just not human. And you can imagine you roll them into a client meeting or somewhere where you're expected to build rapport, and it just doesn't go well. Professional services being a great example. You need to hire grads and interns who you can put in front of the client. It doesn't matter how technically good they are, if you can't reliably put them in front of a client and they reflect your brand well, they're no good to you. This is from the same survey of all the assessment tools, which ones do employers use most often, and they basically tick the ones they use. And you can see that variations of interviews, basically there's no getting around it. You're going to come across an interview at some point, be it a behavioural or group interview or video interviews. So as much as they suck, we're just going to have to get good at it if we're serious about it, and so that's why we're here today. By the way, good on you guys for coming, because I was saying to Ben, I wasn't so diligent when I was at college, and hats off to you to get on the front foot. You're a long way ahead of where I would have been when I was in college. Cool, so let's get into the meat. This is probably oversimplifying things, but as you guys will be seeing, you've kind of started to go through the job application process. The interviews actually tend to be towards the pointy end of the recruitment process, and actually if you've got an interview, you're actually almost there. Only 7% actually made it to an interview. So you've already done really well if you get to the interview stage. Most people get screened out the initial application, so kind of an online form, or various types of screening, online tests, psychological tests, group interviews, panel assessment centres, that kind of stuff. The other, positive thing to take out of this is that if you get to the interview stage, 38% actually get an offer. So that's pretty good odds. So take some confidence from that. And again, I won't spend much time on this, but one thing to be aware of is various different types of interviews. We're kind of focusing on traditional interviews today, but I've deliberately distinguished between traditional interviews and final round interviews, just because you'll notice it'll be unusual just to have one interview. And the way it normally works is first round will be with either someone junior or someone in the human resources department. And they're looking for a certain set of things. And typically you have final round interviews, which is typically with someone more senior, probably a leader within the function that you're going to be working. So, you know, in professional services, it might be a partner, law firm, be a partner, law firm. And I just flag that because they're usually looking for different things. Usually once you're at this point and you're meeting a partner, it's almost, you can relax and be yourself because it's just about fit. They just want to get to know you. And usually, not always, but usually it's just going through the motions and then final sign off. To just, you know, basically enjoy it and get to know them as opposed to stressing out, feeling they have to prove something. When you think about interviews, you tend to focus on the meat of it, which is, you know, seeing they're copying questions from the employer. But you've got these really important bookends at both, which are pretty easy to forget about. Obviously the small talk and building rapport, which is a whole nother workshop and topic in of itself. But you guys will be pretty good at it because you've been through college, right? So again, I keep saying this, but you go to lunch and dinner most days and you sit across the table from someone you don't know much about, so you can do it. You're going to be good at it. That's one of the amazing things about having gone through the college system. You can practice introducing yourself, and it's, you know, can be like a formal introduction, but often in the form of a, walk me through your resume or tell me a bit about yourself. So that's something you can practice and get really good at. We won't spend much time on tonight, but I'm pretty sure you've got some materials on it in the workshop materials here. So
it's the first question in here, so it's got a couple of sort of sample answers and tips in there.
Yeah. So that's something you can get off to a really good start, and then to bring it all home, usually they'll finish up with, you know, do you have any questions for me? And that's a really good opportunity to end on a good note by, show you've done your research, show you want to be there, having done, you know, ask some intelligent questions. And often, you know, that can, it's only, in terms of time, it's only probably less than, you know, a third of the whole interview. But if you start well and you end well, that can be half the battle. This almost sounds a bit corny, if you like understand yourself. Sure, what does that mean? Because you remember, you know, in terms of structure, we say, understand yourself before you understand the interviewer and the job. It's slightly corny, but the point is that self-awareness can be really, really powerful in this, in the initial job search process, but also in the interview process. And it's not easy, as you know, right? Like a lot of people have got, you've got one image of yourself, and that's often at odds with, you know, the person you actually are and the way you actually behave. There's heaps of free tools out there. I'm sure you can recommend some good ones, but principlesuse.com is a free one. It's fairly comprehensive. Basically, it's kind of a personality profile to allow you to, you know, not pigeonhole yourself, but get a bit of a grip on what your relative strengths and weaknesses and interests are. Really, and that's really important. I say that because when you're looking at any given role, and you've done a good job of understanding yourself, you look at a role and it'll be one or two things. It'll either be, this is a great fit for me, and when you get asked about, tell me why this is a fit for you, why should I hire you essentially, why are you a fit for this role, you will be able to answer it with absolute confidence and conviction, and that's a great outcome. The other outcome, and this is also perfectly fine, is you'll decide a role is not good for you. And that's great because it saves you time and allows you to focus on other roles or other stuff that's better use of your time. And you don't want to be one of these grads that just applies for everything and we call it a spray and pray approach, where you're just sending out hundreds of applications and hoping for the best. You're kind of better off just being really targeted and being deliberate and strategic in the jobs you're applying for. And this is one of the best ways to do that. So self-awareness is really powerful if you can use it in the interview as well. I remember when I was interviewing for consulting jobs, like management consulting, I've never been let's say, the quickest guy in the room, to put it nicely. Like, I'm not the sort of guy that has the answers straight away. I kind of like to go home and sit on things, and the answer will come to me in the shower. And I remember this came up in an interview with one of the in the consulting firm I was applying at, and I was honest. I said, look, I'm not going to be the person in the meeting that's like firing off the answers to the client on the spot, and that's not necessarily positive. But that self-awareness, acknowledging that, sort of says to the person interviewing, gives them confidence that you're able to counterbalance that. You're not, for example, if you're not aware of that, you're going to be firing off dumb answers, or just shooting blindly. Whereas at least, I've said, look, I'm aware of this. I know it's a shortfall. I can work on it, and that kind of self-awareness can actually, even if it's not at the surface a good thing, can be really appreciated by the recruiters. This is a fun tool as well, because you can have friends and family and fiancés do it, and you can line up your results against them. And it's quite
not compatible.
It's pretty funny, and we've had team members at Prosple do it, and it's like, you look at it like, oh, everything makes sense now. Like, you've had certain conflicts around the way to approach things, and it's really quite insightful. So I'd encourage it. This is at risk of being overly simple and labouring the point, but again, going to this employer survey we keep referring to, they were asked, of all the skill sets that we saw that you're screening for in graduates and interns, which ones are candidates most lacking? And believe it or not, of all the stuff, it was basic understanding our organisation. So I look at this, and this is great. This is an opportunity, because this is easy stuff for us. If we can just go in, having researched the role, know a bit about the organisation, we're already ahead of over a third of the competition, without a whole lot of effort. So that's a good news story. So understanding the role of the organisation is super important, and as obvious as it sounds, obviously a lot of candidates aren't bothering. So in terms of how we do that, it sounds like a lot of us are leaning towards bigger employers. So that's really easy, because bigger employers, particularly listed employers, they have to report, like it's compulsory that they report stuff. So annual reports, earnings calls, BHP will have all their financial history, everything online, not just financials, but major projects, goals, stuff that's challenging them, what's holding them back. You can go in there knowing a lot about a public organisation, just by what's available on their website. Most listed organisations will have an investor or shareholder section, so easy. Social media has a lot, and this is more, what they're excited about. You're not going to read about the stuff that's troubling them there, but at least you sort of get a feel for what, the positive stuff that they're wanting to talk about. Media coverage and press releases. If you look at press releases, again, that's a bit similar to social media. That'll be their version of what's positive. News. Maybe Caroline, you can show the.
Yeah, so one tool I always use, and I find that nobody else uses, is Google News. Have you ever used that? Can you show them, Jeff?
Yeah.
So you type any name of a company in Google, and then you've got a tab there called News. Now, nobody looks at this, but it's written by journalists. What journalists do is they summarize what the company does for the general public. So you can use the words and the adjective they use to, first of all, understand what they're doing, and you can use it during the interview. For example, if they say, it's a corporate firm, you learn this language before you go, and you can say, oh, I really want to join this corporate firm because, and then it's a way to be like, oh, he understands us. Also, because it's news, you've got all the latest stuff. So all the scandal, for example, they just acquired a Melbourne company, and then you read in the newspaper that they're actually expanding and they want to expand in 2 different states. So you can use that as a chit chat. Oh, I've heard you're expanding, I've heard you just acquired Melbourne, I'm so excited because they've got family in Melbourne, and just the way to build a rapport, and they're like, wow, how did you know that? Well, good news.
So here's a good example. 500 jobs in Deloitte, Adelaide. So if nothing else, a good conversation starter. Another good one, before we started, we had a look at LinkedIn, and we can see if we know anyone or have any mutual connections that are at the company. Old Coles alumni, usually if they work there or used to work there, often pretty happy to help out. And I know you can feel uncomfortable reaching out, but trust me, like, people love feeling useful and giving back and helping out usually. So I'm sure 99% of Old Coles, if they've got a random message from a current student saying, hey, I'm interested in working at BHP, you'd like to think that most of them would be more than happy to grab a coffee and help you out.
Do you think that's exclusively Old Coles or like any sort of expert in the field?
Anyone, yeah. I'm just using Old Coles because you've kind of got a head start there, but yeah, I mean, anyone you know, friends and family, contacts, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I get messages from randoms, about 10 a week on LinkedIn, and I'm a nobody, like I'm a graduate, so, everyone gets it. Yeah, at least. And I've never met them before, they even ask for referrals and things, maybe don't go that far, that's a bit weird, but yeah, just be polite, be direct, and someone will help.
And I always ask is that, what if I received this message from a year 12 student? I saw you, LinkedIn, you're at seminars, can I ask you about this? What would you say? No response? She would say, oh, Semax is great, actually you should do that for your application. You want to help.
Yeah, and it's often, it's one thing to read the news and look at social media, but to talk to someone who's done the role or worked there and can give you the juicy stuff, the insider stuff, that's good. And also, not name dropping, but if you can go into an interview and say, I know such and such, and that degree of familiarity can help out sometimes. And obviously, often these days, senior management, CEOs, they'll be on YouTube, they'll be on podcasts, they'll be doing brand building themselves. So you can often listen for hours about what the CEO of BHP has to say about the world, and get a pretty good idea of how they're thinking about strategy and world issues and growth and competition. So. And also, if you're thinking about, we're focusing mainly on mining and professional services and whatnot, but if you're going to a tech company or a software as a service company and you can go on and use their products, Atlassian here in Australia is a good example, probably one of the most successful tech companies coming out of Australia. The free trial of their products and jump on and use it and go in knowing what it is they do and how you might be able to help out. So it's a little bit of effort, but we're kind of working on the assumption that you're kind of narrowing down your pool a bit and just putting in some, rather than 100 half-hearted applications, you're really going all in on less than 10. And to the extent it's helpful, we've got a bit of a cheat sheet here, so and I'll share these slides with you afterwards. And then also Ben's done a great job here. So point is, take the time to write it down, organise your thoughts. Don't try and memorise all the press releases. Summarise the useful stuff, and you can take it with you in the interview if you need. You don't need to have memorised everything. So that's the organisation, and then you've got the interviewer. It's really helpful to know who it is you're going to meet beforehand. If for some reason they haven't told you who you're meeting, they've invited you to interview, but haven't given you any details, it's perfectly reasonable to respond saying, hey, do you mind sharing who I might be meeting with? That's nothing wrong with that at all. I'll just say quickly, there's a couple of different types of interviewers. Again, possibly obvious, but I didn't know this going into. I studied engineering. I did an internship at Santos, and so I was applying. And the first round, I met with human resources. I just wasn't expecting. I thought I was going to meet an engineer because I was studying engineering and I was going to work as an engineer. It didn't occur to me that there was other functions. So it sounds stupid, but so obviously if you're meeting with someone from human resources, they're not going to have an engineering or mining or psychology background. They might, and you can research that, but possibly not. So they're going to be asking different types of questions. They're going to have a different level of understanding. You can kind of dial the conversation around who you're talking to. Not a lot, but some of the bigger recruiters will outsource initial rounds to recruitment companies. So you won't even be meeting with someone from the company. It'll be a third-party, recruitment process outsourcing business. Not often. Sometimes even face-to-face interviews. Not so much here in Australia. Often phone interviews though, third-party. So keep that in mind. They're not going to. You're not going to be able to engage with them much about the specifics of the company. They're just looking for the high-level, box ticking stuff, if you like. And then finally, normally towards the final, and you're actually meeting with managers and people in the team. So keep that in mind. You'll obviously have different conversation based on who you're meeting with. In terms of researching them, obviously Google. Often they'll have public profiles, websites. Sometimes depending on how senior they are, they'll be doing thought leadership stuff, publishing articles, so you can often find out quite a bit. And then LinkedIn, like I mentioned, is increasingly the kind of go-to tool, like I described, social media for professionals. And in terms of the information you find out, I've just picked a random graduate recruiter. I'm not connected with them, but I can see an awful lot of information about them. This is their LinkedIn profile, so kind of like the Facebook profile. But on LinkedIn, they are a graduate recruitment consultant at Quantium. So I can see, first of all, I have mutual connections, and again, that's useful for just a talking point, or maybe I can, get introductions or whatever. Like that's something to talk about. I can see what they've been posting about as a gauge of what they're interested in, how long they've been in the role, previous roles, where they studied, what they studied. There's, a whole life story here, basically. Volunteer experience, which is cool if you might happen to have a similar interest. That's a really good way to build up rapport with them. What languages they speak, all kinds of stuff. So this is a goldmine. If you're walking into an interview armed with all this background knowledge, there's a lot of stuff you can talk about. It's really easy to build rapport because you know what interests them. You can raise topics that you know they're going to love to talk about, and that's a massive head start.
Makes it more of a conversation as well than a grilling interview.
Exactly.
Which makes it so much easier.
Yeah, that's why you really don't want to neglect that this initial bit here, because it's hard. Like you often find you can have already made up your mind about them before you've even got into the interviews. So that they like you. There's a psychological element to it where they'll almost go a bit easier on you, kind of thing. It's almost unfair and arguably, a bit sad if you're on the wrong end of it. But that's the reality. Everybody's human, so you can use that to your advantage.
And you can use it really smartly. For example, introducing yourself. You've seen your employer was in the same uni, So when you introduce yourself, you're like, oh, I'm studying currently at University of Adelaide. I've seen you were there as well, and then you keep going. But then they might be like, oh, they know about me. Like they've taken the time to do it, so it's cool.
Awesome. So LinkedIn is a powerful tool. It's not a lot of effort. If you haven't already done it, we're doing professional photos for exactly this purpose. That's a lot of information for someone I don't know.
So is it okay to let them know that you've scoped them out on LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
That's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I was thinking that too, like with it.
Yeah.
They're not going to publish anything on here that they don't want you to know.
Yeah.
So if you're quoting anything there, they put it out there to be read.
Yeah.
And also it does seem like a bit of effort, but like when it comes to like writing applications and all that, once you've done one or two, you do not want to be doing them again. So like once you get to that interview stage and you have an interview, it's well worth putting in the hours of prep for it, just so that you don't have to go through the other crap, at other companies. Like once you got it, now you can actually sort of demonstrate, why you're a good fit.
Yeah, no, LinkedIn's a bit different to Facebook and Instagram. People want you, it's profile and brand building. So it's almost to some extent flattering when people are looking you up, and no one's going to think it's weird. So again, there's this cheat sheet to the extent it's helpful. We've got a bit of a framework. There's a simple one here which is linked to, and Ben's done a great job in these materials of fleshing it out a bit more detail. But we've kind of talked about understanding yourself, we've talked about understanding the interviewer and the organisation. Now we're at the final step of understanding this role, this job. And that's obviously as important as anything else, because particularly in big organisations like BHP, working in the HR department is worlds apart from working at a mine out in Roxby Downs. And so, you want to be able to, you're going to speak very differently depending on the role. The cheat sheet we've got is basically trying to take job descriptions, which is what you'll see on a job listing or like on Grad Australia or LinkedIn or whatever, and trying to get it into a format that's a bit more easy to remember and digestible, so that it's easy to talk about in an interview. So unfortunately, a lot of the time, job descriptions aren't written very super well, but there's a lot of clues in there. And so I'll give you an example. We're looking for hints, particularly in those early rounds, about what the interviewer is going to be wanting to be talking about. And so, for example, this is a job that a collegian here applied for and got as an auditor at a self-managed. Well, I don't think they're a fund, but they do audits of self-managed super funds. Anyway, I've just highlighted a couple of sort of attributes and skills and qualities that are, in this case, kind of buried, but obviously important to them. So they're talking about stuff like attention to detail, time management. It's covered, but they talk about, people who are happy to do routine tasks. And so you kind of pull them out and list them out, and then hopefully you've got the time, make a few notes again to each of them about how, if this comes up, if you're asked about it, what anecdote or what story or what can I talk about that points to me having this skill. This idea of talking points and anecdotes is important because you recall we talked about in the last workshop. At this point, it's no longer good enough just to say, "Oh yeah, I'm a great communicator," because everybody can say that. That's no longer a test. You have to show it. And if they're a good interviewer, they'll be probing you for real world examples for the stuff that is explained in the position description. And if it's actually really well done, they will have a interview form that is kind of their version of this, where they're kind of grading you against each of the points that they're looking for. And if it's done properly, the points that they're grading you against should be at least alluded to in the position description. So, lots of hints there. And ideally, if you're kind of thorough, you can get to a point where you can walk into an interview and there's not really going to be any surprises because you kind of know what they're looking for. You can gauge based on what they're looking for the types of questions you're going to be asked, and based on that you can have some talking points ready to go. So
I know for the mining, to use that as a sort of example, I spoke to someone at one of my lecturers at uni who works for Glencore, and he said that mining companies are really big on safety because it's a very high risk environment. And there was an example where he was in an interview process and he asked someone where they've shown initiative in regards to safety, and some guy had experience, there was a guy and a girl, the guy had experience in an exploration rig up in Russia, and he's like, oh yeah, went out in the exploration rig, the drill was shaking, no one was wearing PPE, told them to wear PPE, but they didn't listen, so I just shut up and weren't going. So that was horrific, that's a big so basically just didn't worry about him. And then the girl, she said, yeah, I worked in a pub and I noticed underneath the cellar the floor was slippery. So I just got the manager to get non-slip mats, and he didn't. But then I kept pressuring him to get non-slip mats. Anyway, by the end of the month we got non-slip mats, and like, well, this is cool because she's recognised the issue, she's pestered them, she was persistent, and she got it done. It's not related to mining, but the premise is still there. So
it's a great example, really good example.
And it's something you have to do in advance, because if I can give your example, Kyle.
Yeah, go.
We're talking, so your job, what were you applying for?
The youth care worker role.
Youth care worker. Callum had little experience with kids, but because we looked at the job description, it's really about kids. We, thought, what experiences you have, and then you found out about the year 12 buddy. So Callum was doing a program when he was a buddy for younger kids. And so if he hadn't thought about it previously, he wouldn't have even think about it, because it was 2 years ago, and just flipping his mind. To really take the time to be like, okay, like this, the pub is related to safety. What can be related? In this example, it was like excellent written and verbal communication. She remembered she did the debating team. That's an excellent example for someone, like, great.
Which kind of speaks to this final part here. If safety's on the position description at a mine, and you happen to have worked on a mine in Russia, then mention that, if you did the right thing, of course, and addressed it. That's absolute best case scenario, right? Like real world, real job, that's great. But that's rarely going to be the case with students, right? And so if you have that, great, like that's the most relevant. But it could be, you've studied something or you've worked in a bar, and there's tiers to this, right? So the point here is, if you have something that's relevant, specific to the job, great. Use that, but then you can kind of work back down to general work experience in a bar, extracurricular stuff, or maybe you just studied it or you did well in a subject or whatever. Usually, most of the stuff they're looking for in grad and internship roles, you should be able to, we're talking about communication, interpersonal skills, you can usually find something at some point, even if it's just related to your studies, where you can talk about it. And so, you just, slot it in here as a talking point, and you're ready to go. If you can avoid it, don't throw yourself in the deep end. Like, don't go just straight all in for an interview, or even don't go straight to mock interviews, because you can kind of kill your confidence. Like you do suck when you start, right? Like it's not a natural. It's not natural to sit across the table from a stranger and field questions for them for an hour. It takes practice. So what I'm suggesting here is start with some easy stuff. Easiest thing is literally just write it down, like we have done here. Just bang it out, get your thoughts on paper. Once you've kind of got your talking points, just say it out loud, because often saying it out loud, it's one thing to write it down, but it comes out very differently. Conversationally, things can look good on paper, but so just literally in a room by yourself, say it out loud. Once you're kind of comfortable with that, and again, just baby steps, just say it in front of the mirror. And at this point, you've got the distraction of looking at yourself in the mirror. You're looking for things like your posture and your facial expressions and your gestures. again, it sounds oversimplified, but just gradually building confidence and going through the motions. At that point, then you go and do mock interviews because you've got a clear idea of what you're going to talk about. You've practiced saying it. It's starting to come reasonably naturally to you. And again, within the spirit of progressively layering on the difficulty, start with a good friend or parents or someone who's going to be fairly forgiving, and then do it. You know, university careers services often have mock interview services or workshop days where they have real employers and you can do fake interviews, so keep an eye out for that. And then, you know, finally, if you know someone in the industry or someone you look up to where the pressure's a little bit, you feel that sense of pressure, you know, ask them, do you mind if I do a mock interview for a job at BHP? And just start to simulate that real world environment where you're not comfortable. You know, that's something you want to kind of get used to. But you don't want to jump straight into it, because if you do that straight away, you're not going to nail it, and depending on, you know, your personality, it could just be a totally deflating experience. At that point, then you start to interview with organisations, and hopefully at this point it's kind of coming naturally. You've got your confidence, it's more conversational. One thing I'm saying here is, you know, if you have like a dream job, in an ideal world, that's not your first interview ever. Ideally, you can go and do a couple of applications at other firms and get to the interview stage and go through the motions of doing interviews before you go and interview. If, let's say your dream job is Deloitte, you've done a few interviews beforehand. Now, on one level, I was hesitant to make this recommendation, but I figure it's win-win in the sense that worst case, it's good practice. And you're just getting used to it. But it's surprisingly common to just happen across a job that, you know, you weren't all in on, but you went in, you met the people, you learnt more about it, and you end up realising it's a good fit. That's surprisingly common. And particularly, you know, particularly smaller firms, because often it can be easier to get to the interview stage at smaller firms because you don't have 40,000 candidates going for the job, and you can go into these smaller firms, you know, kind of treating it as a practice run, but then you realise, you know, I really like the managing director, we got along well, I'm going to get really good experience, I can learn a lot from them, this kind of stuff, pretty common. So I'd actually recommend that. I see it as a win-win. And then at that point, by the time you're rolling into a job interview at Deloitte, it's just, you're a well-oiled machine, you've seen it all, and you enjoy it almost. It's no longer a big deal. A couple of super quick points before I hand over. One of the things I notice is that often the smartest people use the simplest language, and when you see people trying to use really fancy language and layer on the really technical terms, almost like they're trying to hide something, they're trying to hide a lack of substance. So just do away with the fancy language and the jargon. It'll be easier for you because you're not overcomplicating stuff. Makes it a lot easier to get the message across if you just explain it like you would to your grandma, for example. And a lot of the time, people appreciate it. If they're an industry expert, they'll appreciate it because a lot of the time industry experts see through the jargon, and you know, they want to know that you can explain it simply because you'll be dealing with people who don't understand it. Or you're meeting with an HR person who knows nothing about mining engineering or psychology, and so it's incumbent on you to explain stuff in a way that they can understand. So one of the things I want to stress, you know, by doing all this practice, we're not aiming to be kind of robotic, rote-learned responses. The way I think about it is, you know, when you kind of about halfway through the process, you're still that's when you're robotic and rote-learned and you're not really relaxed. But by kind of gradually going through it, progressively ramping up the difficulty, by the time you get to this point, it is coming naturally, it is more conversational, and you can improvise a bit, and it's, you know, you work through that robotic stage, you've got beyond that. You really don't want to, you know, I think I'm stealing your thunder a bit here, mate, but I often talk about the airport test. This is something that comes up in consulting. We were certainly encouraged to think about this when we were meeting candidates, when we were on the recruiting side in the consulting firm I worked at. When you're meeting someone, you ask themselves, you put yourself in a scenario where you're flying to a client meeting or you're on your way back from a project, whatever. The flight's been delayed 5 hours and you're stuck in the airport with this person. Do you want to be stuck with them? Yes or no? If the answer is no, get rid of them. Can't cut the interview short. Like, you're wasting your time. If you're happy to be stuck in the airport with this person for 5 hours, that's a really good sign. That's the threshold you're looking for when you're interviewing candidates. You're going to spend a good chunk of your waking life around this person, this type of person, and so you're not doing yourself a favour if you're recruiting robots who are really good at memorising stuff and rote learning stuff, but they're not real humans. Okay, so I don't want to mistake this preparation for a mechanical robotic type interview process, if that makes sense. The final point is, even though we're really prepared at this point, you kind of want to go into the interview expecting it to go badly, expecting being mentally prepared to be caught off guard. The reason I say that is because if they're a good interviewer, it's inevitable. They're gonna catch you off guard. In fact, in our interview guidelines at Prosple, it says you are not doing your job as an interviewer unless you get the interviewee out of their comfort zone. If you go through the entire interview and allow them to dictate the pace and direction of the interview, and it's just a friendly back and forward, and they're essentially going through this stuff that they've prepared, you haven't learned anything about them. All you've learned is that they're well prepared, and that doesn't tell us anything about what really matters to us at Prosple, and that's their ability to think and solve problems and that kind of stuff. So we explicitly say at Prosple, if you're going to be doing interviewing, you need to catch them, get them out of their comfort zone, because that's when you see their true colours. And that can come in a number of different forms. It doesn't mean being, rude or anything like that. It's often what we'll do, and this is good to know actually. So what we'll do is we'll let them talk about an example, and a poor interviewer will say, oh, okay, great, and move on to the next thing. We'll say, okay, tell me more about that. How did that work? What exactly did you do? How do you know that was the best approach and not this? What was the data to justify that? And just pump them on it until you either see that there's substance there or the wheels fall off. And you realise that they're well prepared, but there's no substance. So, point being is that if they're a skilled interviewer and they're worth their salt, it's inevitable that you'll be out of your comfort zone, and that's fine. That's to be expected. It's just part of their job.
I actually have a few anecdotes. I applied for the army, and I was at the job interview. I got welcomed, and then they make me wait 45 minutes in front of them. I could see they were not busy, and they were just in the office. They were like, "Oh, you have a chair here. Just wait here." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's been 45 minutes." So I was just being really calm, and I've heard when I got the job and after a few months that it was a test. They were making people wait on purpose to see how they would react. And apparently some people just freak out, say it's irrespectuous, and because in the army you need to know if people are compliant, so it was one test. And then when I applied for BCG, my final round, it was with the massive partner that was going to sign on me, and I had all done 7 rounds before, everything went super well. And in the middle of me introducing myself, he takes his phone, calls someone, and literally leaves, and have a conversation. It was all glass window, and have a conversation, comes back and waits for me to say something. And what I had found is there was a little statue of himself. So I think he was expecting me to be saying something like, just being, uncomfortable, and there was a statue of him. And I was like, oh, I just noticed you had a statue of yourself. This is so cool. Where did you get that? And he got thrown off, and we just talked about the statue, and then I got back into my role, and I could tell I had passed. But sometimes they just have tricks like this.
If stuff is a bit, unexpected, just roll with it. And if you've gone in expecting that, hopefully they play friendly and they're not trying to freak you around like that. If you go in expecting stuff like that. I've even heard stupid stuff like in investment banking interviews where you're on the 50th floor and they'll do stuff like ask you to open the window to let the breeze in or something and watch you struggle with the window just to fluster you, right? Borderline cruel. So hopefully you don't come across that. But
with the industry jargon today, when I had my interview with Glencore, they asked me specifically what do you know about our operations here and the local geology of the area? It's I didn't go into the technical geology of the area, but I'm Glencore, the mine sits on this, that, and use technical language because it was a technical question.
Yeah.
So I guess it sort of depends on, and that was with, one of them was the senior mine geologist and standard, just a generic mine geologist. So.
Yeah. That's a good question. In some cases they'll be inviting you to show your technical understanding, and that might have been borderline more of a sort of a technical or case study interview where they're explicitly testing your technical knowledge. But I guess as a general rule, if you can explain it in a simpler way, you do. I think is probably the main takeaway. Nothing to be gained by overcomplicating things. Generally, people, if they know what if they already know it, they won't be impressed. If they don't know it, you'll put them offside because,
I guess in some ways you don't want to oversimplify it either.
No, that's it.
Some things either, because you could quite easily do that.
Yeah.
Certain things.
Yeah.
Especially in the geology situation, you don't want to sound like a complete idiot.
No, that's true.
To a certain degree.
Yeah. I think if you're going to err on one side, err on the side of oversimplifying. Because I think, if anything, it's difficult to explain things simply. It takes more effort, it takes more thought. Giving the textbook explanation of tectonic plates is probably actually easier, but actually explaining to your mother how tectonic plates work in a way that she'll understand shows that you have a better understanding of it, is more difficult to do, takes more skill, they can of course say, yeah, I get it, move on, that's fine. That's easier to say, that's easier for someone to acknowledge than, I don't understand, you're making me feel silly. Because that'll just, one makes them feel good, and that's what you want to do. You want to make the interviewer feel good whenever you can. And if you're making them feel smart because you explain it really well and it's simple, that's winning. You don't want to make other people feel dumb if you can help it. So how about we go? We've already gone full out, haven't we? Sorry,
I've seen it a couple of times. What's commercial awareness?
Yeah, I was going to ask the second criteria.
Yeah. Good question. It obviously depends on the organisation. Where was it? So 16% of employers are saying it's assessed and very important. 43% are saying assessed and quite important. So it's a big deal. I think it depends on the organisation. Let me give you an example for a role we're hiring for, the Prosple marketing and social media. Relatively junior candidates outside of sort of straight out of uni. They'll usually be pretty thorough on what are the different social media strategies, and they'll have a reasonable grasp of the basics of social media and marketing, for example. But what you'll often find is if you push them a little bit and you say, okay, well, let's come up with a campaign, and our budget's this, and our cost per, the revenue we can generate from each click is this. I'm making this up as I go. But as soon as you start to introduce commercial constraints and numbers into it, it's kind of like there's a total disconnect between the theory and the real world application. And the reality is, for almost every organisation you're applying for, probably with the exception of government jobs, at the end of the day, they've got to make money. They'll have their missions and values and all the rest, but in order to deliver on their mission, they have to be profitable, have to have sustainable profit. And so that means you have to be making decisions through a commercial lens. What's this cost me? What's the return? Depending on the job, it'll mean things like return on capital and net present value. It depends on the role, right? But mining, you probably, net present value is maybe something you might have come across. Anyway, so it's just that disconnect between the pure theory, the book side of things, and how that gets applied in a business setting where profit matters. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, definitely.
How do you demonstrate that you've got commercial awareness?
I'd say you'd find it in your research. So for PwC, if you look at what area they sort of work in, they're a professional services company. They service major companies around the world. What do those companies do? So first you understand PwC, and then go, what business environment do they work in, and how do they make their money? So who are their clients, and what do their clients do? Who are their competitors, and what makes PwC better? Not the Deloitte, not that it's true, but what is it about PwC that's different to their competitors? What's their advantage? That sort of.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they will ask any question regarding this in the interview.
Yeah, it depends on how important. I mean, if it's key, they'll probably do it via a case study, for example. But I mean, as a general rule, if you can, we talked about these talking points here. If you can pick out stuff where there's a commercial element to it, and this kind of, again, speaks to this idea of prioritising relevant work experience over just study. Anything where there's dollars and cents and budgets, and you've done the work on committee, for example, so sponsorship, presumably you had a goal to meet, and you had a certain number of sponsors you wanted to get, and you know what I mean, like all this kind of stuff, and maybe you pitched it to the local businesses in terms of a return on investment, you get so many extra, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but that's a good example.
And also to sort of touch on that, it's not that they'll directly ask you, tell us about your commercial knowledge, but if you go ahead to a couple ahead, so a question like this is almost certainly going to come up, especially at BHP, at PwC, like big companies. This is where you can demonstrate your commercial knowledge. So when they say, why do you want to work here? If you can say, well, I know that, Deloitte, PwC, EY, they all are in this field, but you guys, have the highest revenue, or the biggest growth last year. That shows that you've looked at the whole field and you're still specifically want to work at that firm. That's a much better approach than just saying, I want to work here because the brand's cool, or this will look good on my resume, this will make me look better in the future. They don't want to hear that, but if you can touch on that commercial awareness, then it shows that you're sort of serious.
But you asked me this question that's really relevant, and in interviews, when someone uses a language you don't know, for example, they're going to talk about software, you take your notepad and you listen to their answer, and they will feel like, if you're in a client meeting, if you ask questions, that means you're going to see opportunities. That's also a way to show them that you can be good at commercial awareness with little tricks like this.
Yeah. No, I think in summary, I think one of the things is can be lacking in what unis aren't super good at teaching is the commercial side of things. Like you can't learn all the theory, but at the end of the day, there's a business that has to make money. And to just keep that in mind when you're answering questions.
Yeah. They'll actually, Chancellor will specifically ask about it. So one of the questions I got in my partner interview was, what have you done to use your skills outside of uni? It's a really good one. It throws most people off guard. Engineering people, which might be similar to you guys, get it all the time. It's like, cool, you've learned all this stuff. You've learned psychology. Where have you applied it? And
what did you say?
Yeah.
What did I say? I said it was to do with I related it to agriculture. So I said like I used my knowledge from university and learning about different rock types to then translate that into different soil types and topography and how like water would move over a landscape and what you know, if you've got a rock high in iron, you're probably gonna have a soil high in iron, and just like similar stuff to that. Or problem solving stuff that you might do through uni, like, you know, apply that in. It doesn't have to be necessarily geology related, but it can be the skills that you've learnt there and plonk them into somewhere else.
Yeah.
Alright, we'll probably go fairly quickly through these because every question that's in there is also in this, and there are more in here, so they're sort of like use that as a guide, and they also have actual sort of sample dot point answers that you can just chuck your own information and talking points into. But really quick, like this comes up almost guaranteed right at the start, and to be sort of harsh, if you mess this up, they're not listening to you for the rest of the interview. You know, other things will just go onto their mind. I've sat in on quite a few now, and they start listing off their resume that I've got in front of me. And I'm not like the core interviewer, I'm sort of just sitting there on the side. But it just becomes boring. Like if I started reading, if I said, make your answer specific to the role you're applying for, are you actually listening to me? Or are you just going, I'm already seeing this, why is he talking? So, you know, you want to make sure that you're telling an engaging story and make it a story. So, you know, start with, you know, why are you doing what you're doing? You know, what is it about geology, psychology that makes you want to do it? And once you've sort of built that up, now you want to link that to what is it about this company that allows you to sort of, you know, present your strengths and everything to that company, which ultimately will make the best value for the company. Because a lot of people sort of think like these jobs just exist so that you can work there. But it's the other way around. Like, why should they hire you over someone else, you know, to make eventually more money? That's, you know, the end of the day. That's what it's about. So, you know, look through the company in the research stage and go like, what is their mission statement, or what, you know, what are they trying to achieve, and then link that back in your story about why you know, fit that perfectly. I think one of the quick examples was Deloitte said we have fun but with serious intent. So I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, I want to, you know, achieve X, Y, Z in my life, but I want to have fun along the way. So I've come to college so I can, you know, be serious about my study, but at the same time I want to enjoy the process and I want to have fun and meet people. And that was like the perfect example of just saying, you know, here's this kid and he matches the company at that level perfectly. And then, you know, close it off. And so that should be the way, you know, you close it off, create that link between you and the firm. Does that make sense?
That's clever.
Yeah, one thing I did with Glencore, to bring them into it again, is I literally went on their website, found their values and what they stand for, put that on a piece of paper and went like, right, you know, I can't remember what one of them was, but one would say leadership, and then like right where I like leadership, right about where that slotted into my life, and then it could have been like innovation, right, where have I been innovative, and just written out there, and then got that and then consolidated that further, just literally had it in a dot point thing right in front of me ready to go, and then you just expand on that as you go along, and then they're just like, oh shit.
Yeah, definitely. And if it sounds sort of weird, like, oh, I don't know what to write and everything, if you just read this start to finish, it will tell you exactly what to research, exactly what to write down, note down. By the time you get through to the end of this, you'll have talking points and you'll know how to take them from, you know, this, was it the mentorship thing you did there, the skill you learned from that, and then knowing how to plug that into a sample answer. So you will sort of be taken, like, it'll hold your hand through the whole process, basically. They're definitely, you know, either one or both, they're going to ask about your strengths, but more commonly, and to throw you, like, what is your biggest weakness? It's a really weird thing to answer because you have to give an honest answer to someone. If I just said, you know, what's your biggest weakness right now, and you want me to hire you, what are you going to say? Like, it's a pretty weird, you know, question. So some really important things is, you know, you definitely want to highlight a real weakness. Don't tell me you're a perfectionist or you work too hard, because I'm just going to be like, bullshit. You know, it just sounds crap. But at the same time, you can't say a real weakness of, you know, oh, I like geology, but I don't like going out in the sun, or I don't like getting my hands dirty. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. So there's a couple of examples in here, and I think I've put them up there. Like, fear of public speaking. That's the one that I used. For something. This actually terrifies me, speaking to a group of people. It's not really needed for my job. If I was going for a news reporter job, I wouldn't say it. But for an analyst position, for a geo position, it's a good one. Same with difficulty delegating. Like it's one of those things where it's a real challenge, it's a real weakness, but it doesn't really have real consequences. And they're the ones that you want to highlight. And then the most important thing is, once you mention the weakness, don't dwell on it. Showcase what you're doing to overcome it, because that's what they actually want to see. They want to see you self-aware, and then how is this kid actually, growing and developing himself. Yeah.
I got a funny one on this one. I always prepare 3 weaknesses, because sometimes they ask for 1, but sometimes they ask 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses. So it's better to prepare 3 and only use 1.
Yeah.
And one of my third one, I always make it funny. So I would go like, well, I actually have a really bad weakness that almost got me fired in my previous job, so they all get what's happening. And then I just pause and I say, I almost broke every coffee machine. I just don't know how they work. And then everybody starts laughing, and you kind of like use this humor in good times, and it completely throws off the atmosphere and the energy. So try to put humor in your interview.
I guess you'd be remembered for that as well.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
When they come across your thing again.
A team question is almost definitely going to come up as well. It's just the way they can ask it. Is a million different ways. Basically though, this is really critical because everyone comes out of uni, having done group assignments and that sort of stuff. But we've had so many people where they come out and they're so eager to prove themselves that they talk about every leadership role that they've ever had. And it's like, that's brilliant, you've got leadership skills, but you're a grad, you're at the bottom of the food chain. Can you actually take an order and take on tasks that have been given to you? So depending on what role you're applying for, you want to show sort of adaptability. And that's like, giving 2 examples of, I've stepped up before and been a team leader because I wanted a certain outcome, I wanted a certain grade, other people in the team didn't really care too much, but I did, so I stepped up and made it happen. But then you also need to be like, I was in this group and I noticed someone else was really keen to be a leader, so I stepped back, and let them take on the position. And that shows that you can actually just be in a room with the director and they know that they can, get you to do something and you're going to get it done, basically. Even if you don't like working in teams, I don't want to say lie. Maybe don't apply for a job that requires teamwork if you don't like doing it, because almost every organisation is built around it. That's why it's a company. Otherwise, it would just be a single person running it from his house. So you need to focus. You really need to show that you can work in a team. Also, if you do get rejected from the job, chances are it's nothing you did wrong as well. It's just they have a team. So PwC, for example, they're very similar to Deloitte. They work in teams of between 5 and 10 people. It's an organisation of hundreds of thousands of employees, but they work in small groups. And when they're applying for a new grad, basically they probably have 1 position available per team. That's usually how it works. If you don't fit the mould that they need, it's nothing bad against you. It can't hurt your confidence. It's just they needed someone that was extremely creative and extremely outgoing. And if you're a little bit more passive, a little bit more methodical, you're simply not going to get it because that's not what they need. Yeah. And it sucks, but it's got to feel better than thinking like, oh, I wasn't good enough or something. It's just you weren't exactly what they were after, which you can help overcome as well by showing that you're adaptable. If you're a specific person, then you've only got one you're like a key. You're only going to fit in one lock. But if you can show that you can adapt to things, then you've got a much greater chance, of getting into different places.
Geo's the same thing. Being in an isolated environment, they want certain people, certain, personalities, I guess. So, they want everyone to work together, especially in exploration.
I put this one in here because it's not just about how you answer it. Like, you all will have examples of, tests and assignments due in the same week or something. and you can use that as an example, but this actually, if a good answer here will show you how you actually do it. So if you're able to articulate like, all right, when I'm getting overwhelmed, I list out everything I need to get done, and I organize them by due date and level of importance, and then I set my own, due dates so that I can get things done earlier to then focus on new things, and then I work out what I can't possibly get done and work out how I could delegate that. That answer there shows way more than just saying, oh, here's a time where I juggled multiple things. You can actually show the thought process behind it, and that's what they want to see. So that sort of
I remember
makes
having this
sense.
question.
Yeah. Because like at the end of the day, they're going to dump a whole heap of work on you wherever you are, and it's about sorting through it all and making sure that you can A, get it done yourself, but also highlighting like be honest and say like if it's something that I can't get done, it's better to ask for assistance than just not getting it done, because not getting it done will have real consequences, especially at PwC. The client report won't go out or something, and that's going to be far worse than you saying like, actually, can I have a bit of assistance here? I need a bit of help. I think this is the last one, and it's a really good one. It's like the weakness again, which is how do you present a time where things did not go right, you might look silly or bad, and how do you turn that around into a positive? So just like the weakness thing, you want to pick a real failure, not some wishy-washy thing that's just like, oh no, I made a small mistake here. Pick a real failure where there wasn't any drastic consequences or anything, and don't dwell on it. Focus on how you turn that around and actually turn the bad situation into a good one or stepped up. And make sure it is your own failure. Like a real typical answer that I hear all the time is, I was in this team. As soon as they say that, I was in this team and we did this, it's like, okay, so they can't actually take responsibility for what they've done. If you can own up and say, look, I was in this team and I personally made this mistake here where, XYZ went wrong, but then I noticed it and this is what I did to fix it, then you're in a far better sort of position. I think the perfect example I used was I was leading a team at uni and I thought we needed to do it a certain way, and halfway through I realised that I was wrong. And it sucked because it required like an all-nighter to sort of fix it and everything, but then we made the changes, we fixed it, we ended up getting it right, and then I bought everyone beers. Something like that where you can show like, yep, I made a mistake, I realised it, I was honest about it, and then we all fix the situation. That is a much better sort of way of going about it. Back to you.
Cool. So again, there's the good stuff is in the document, so don't feel like you need to memorise anything. I'll power through this last section. On the day, dress well, it goes without saying, right? Give yourself plenty of time to get there, and that's not just like get there with 15 minutes to spare, which is your point, Ben, but like get there with time to like compose yourself, and let's just assume there's going to be no parking or whatever, so that you're not running in there sweating in a suit and flustered and all the rest. This is Caroline's point. Bring a notepad and a pen
in front of you, not just in your book, just have it ready.
Yeah. Taking notes is a way of showing you're listening. If you want to, there's an art to not, like if Ben's interviewing, not taking notes like this. Like you can kind of do it in a way where you kind of still been interacting. And obviously in things like case study interviews, Sean, where it's quite difficult and it's several stages to solving a problem, you're going to have to write it down. You can't memorise it. So there's a funny one. Be polite to everyone. I mean everyone. I remember a couple of instances where those candidates were on the fence about in the consulting firm I used to work at, and the one I remember in particular, there was a debate about whether he had an attitude or not. Like a question about arrogance and whatever, and they ended up asking the receptionist about his demeanour and whether he talked to her or not. So, and as I understand, that's not that uncommon, because often the test of someone's character is how they treat people who are below them in inverted commas. So don't be surprised if receptionists or if someone else is being asked about their perception of you, because you should do your best to be kind and polite to everyone. Obviously, to the extent you need to practice, but introducing yourself warmly and confidently, shaking hands, eye contact, all this kind of good stuff. Again, this is a whole nother interview, but I think one of that real hacks to building rapport quickly is just asking questions. Sounds stupidly simple, but people love talking about themselves, particularly if you get them talking about stuff they love talking about. People feel like you have to be talking to be doing well in an interview or doing well in a conversation. It's total opposite. The more they're talking, the more you're winning. It's that simple. Almost without exception. But again, that's a whole other topic. And like I said before, expect the unexpected. We've kind of covered this. Like, be ready to be caught off guard, and indeed, if they're a good interviewer, they'll be hunting for a weakness to catch you unawares, to poke holes in your story just to see how you react. I won't show the slide, but there's a thing on what to wear. I think the rule there is work out what the interviewer is going to be wearing and just go slightly above as a sign of respect, basically. So if you're going into a work, a mine site and it's high vis, don't go in a full three-piece suit, but wear smart casual, business casual type stuff. And at the other end of the spectrum, if the interviewer is in a suit and tie, you also wear a suit and tie, and take note of what you're wearing, because they're not wearing a suit and tie for the fun of it. They're doing it because in that workplace, people notice. It's a way they show respect to clients or customers or whatever. And so they're going to be looking at how you're dressed, because they're going to be thinking, can I put this person in front of a client? Clearly in that environment, the way you dress matters. So nothing to be gained by going in, being casual, you don't care, whatever. It's a sign of respect, dressing well, and generally that means slightly dressing above what the norms are in that workplace. There's always one tool in every graduate recruitment who comes in dressed in like the bloody bow tie and the dinner suit. Don't be that person. There's obviously bounds. But I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. It's a question that comes up quite a bit, is like, what do I actually wear? At least, the answer I've given, the examples I've given is obviously male-centric for a reason. At least it's relatively simple for us. And that's it, I think.
I know when I did my interview, both GOs literally had just walked through the door from being down from the blasting. So they were covered in crap in their high vis, and they're like, hang on, and they're just like, what? They're like, yeah, right. And I think I did have a dress shirt on and just my jacket on over the top, which was well above what they were wearing. Didn't really know what to expect at that stage.
No, that's it.
Whereabouts did you do your interview?
I did mine, this was at the height of COVID last July. So I had mine was in my room on Zoom. And if you're doing it on Zoom, make sure, I didn't fall for it thankfully, make sure you're careful of what's behind you. Don't have your clothes hanging up behind you, don't have your cupboard behind you. Go so there's a nice white wall, and don't stare at the screens. Look into the camera, so you're actually looking at them. I had trackies, I had my trackies and Uggies on, and just shirt and whatever.
For my BHP answering questions thing, I didn't realise until we about to start recording. It's a bit immature, but I've got all the kinds of pale ale, I drank the stuff. I didn't realise until I was about to start that I was sitting at my desk with it all behind.
It could go one of two ways. I remember one of them was one of the safety questions, because they probed me twice about it. One of them was the use of pesticides on the farm and introducing PPE correct procedures, which should be done anyway. And then the other one, I sort of judged the vibe, and I ended up talking about firearm safety. Bit extreme, but I sort of figured out where they sort of sat with it all fairly quickly. And then they're like, oh yeah, mate, like we go out shooting pigs all the time. Like on the weekend you can go out, and then it ended up being more of a conversation. So, and they can, I think you mentioned it at one of your other ones, they will probe your social media.
Oh, definitely.
So I brought up an example of a guy who, this was from Richard Lilly at uni. There's a lecturer you'll have next year.
Yeah.
He
What
was
does he do? The economic and mine geo?
economic mine geo and mineral and energy resources. He was interviewing a guy, looked awesome on paper, interviewed really well, about ready to give him the job, did a quick probe on the socials, and his profile picture was him smoking a bomb. He didn't get the job. Someone who wasn't as qualified definitely got the job. Just because of that little slip up. If he hadn't put that up, he probably would have got the job.
Little slip up, that's pretty stupid.
But also probably would have got picked up for doing drugs on the mine site and got kicked out instantly. So
But also like tagged photos. That's the big one that they look for deliberately. Yeah.
Birthday posts are big. I'd recommend doing scouts of birthday posts and anything ASAP. Just delete stuff. And even have a chat with them. Have a chat with your mates.
Yeah.
As well. Be like, look, don't post this shit on my stuff.
Yeah.
On birthdays or whatever.
Yeah. Video interviews are tough. I don't envy you guys. I think they're harder to build rapport. You know, you don't have the same body language cues. Yeah, we could probably do a whole other workshop just on video interviews. But
the one that I did with BHP, I like sent a cover letter on my resume and got to like the next round, and it was like wasn't like an interview kind of thing. It was like one of the ones they ask you a question and you have to record. I can't remember what it was called, the website.
Yeah,
it was
like a pre-record, one-way interview type thing.
Yeah, like it's just a quick video with like a question, and you get like 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah.
That was I thought it was anyway.
They're harder than interviews again because you don't have the same cues of talking to someone.
Yeah. And you only got 30 seconds to prepare to like, it started recording automatically after 30 seconds after that's the question. So you're trying to like scribble down as much as you can think of,
Yeah, it's no fun.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I don't think it's necessarily the right way to screen candidates because you end up screening out, the diamonds in the rough. But it's just the reality of these firms that have tens of thousands of candidates and you just can't interview them all. So yeah, it's annoying, but it's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah. One of the last tips I'll say is, and it sort of covers it in this is a sort of shortened version, it's not specific to any sort of degree. But when you're preparing, come up with a list of questions that sort of covers all the bases. So like a motivational one, a behavioural one, a technical one, that sort of thing. And when you do that and you practice your responses, you're actually practicing like your talking points. So if I ask you a specific leadership question, you wouldn't have prepared for it, but you've prepared a different kind of leadership question, and you should be able to just plug and play, things that you talked about and move them around. So it's like, it'd be like studying for an exam, though online may be a bit different. You don't know what they're going to ask you, but you can learn the content. In this case, the content's yourself, your life experiences, your personality traits, that sort of stuff. If you understand that, it actually doesn't matter what they ask you. And it doesn't matter, because in a real interview, they'll ask you something, you don't get 30 seconds to come up with an answer, you just have to go. Yeah. So learn yourself, and then it doesn't matter what they ask you, because you just go, oh yeah. Instantly you just go, yep, I can relate that to another question I've answered, and I can relate that question to talking points X, Y, Z, and then you can just, you just plug and play.
And of course, the standing offer, if you want to do mock interviews or go through any of these steps with Carl and I, feel free to. That's what we're here for. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. And it was really good of you to spend your, Tuesday night.
No problem.
No, it's very useful, and like I said, very obvious why you got the job. Some competition, huh? This is the sort of guy you have to compete against. No. But thanks, mate, and thanks for coming, guys. Again, very good to see you on the front foot. It's impressive.